Well, we have with us in our studios today a very cerebral global affairs analyst. Professor Ademola Abbas joins us in our studios here in Abuja. Good morning, and it's good to see you.
Nice to meet you too, Margaret.
I dare say I can bet my last penny that you have been watching what's been happening internationally. I just want to ask you, are you a little disappointed? Because this happened in the middle of all of the crisis that was currently going on in the Middle East, and it didn't seem that there was one word from ECOWAS leaders as to how, the region should be viewing the problems currently brewing in the Middle East.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I don't think it's so much of a disappointment, to be honest with you, because I don't think ECOWAS will have wanted what was going on then, still going on now in the Middle East, to overshadow whatever it was about to do in Abuja when they met and stuff like that. But having said that, what one would have expected, even if for just, courtesy reasons, because you had a major war, whether you like it or not, albeit just for 12 days, but people died. A lot of conflagration, a lot of tension in the Middle East. You will have expected, to some extent, ECOWAS to reflect on that and maybe to just say one or two things about why and how ECOWAS should be able to tread. But again, it's a very sensitive issue. And that's why I'm saying that it's not so much of a disappointment from where I see. I think it might be a political strategy not to be seen, to be using the platform that was meant to pass a baton of leadership from one person to another within ECOWAS and to highlight some of their own challenges and what they've been doing and to allow that to be bogged down. Because in that kind of environment, you say one thing about Middle East will be subjected to different interpretations that might not go well.
Yeah, even if it was just a statement of concern. But some people will say that maybe that was reflected in the election of the current chairman. The current chairman, Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is currently a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, and they had quite a lot to contribute to the debate that happened with the UN Security Council over the weekend. So maybe because we had heard, there had been stories that another president, contrary to who was elected, beg your pardon, chairman, contrary to who was eventually elected or who eventually emerged, had been pinned down by the ECOWAS leaders.
Well, that might be true. But look, it's a lot of factors come to play how you choose leadership of sub-regional or continental organization, be it ECOWAS or ECAS or EC, whatever you are, or even at the African Union level. Many things are considered. But why the choice of Sierra Leone immediately after Nigeria? That might have played, the fact that Sierra Leone is a permanent member of permanent non-security council member might have played a role in that. Again, how much leverage do you have as a member of non-permanent security council? It's all in the open. But the most important thing, at least, is the fact that the baton passed from Nigeria to Sierra Leone, in the sense that there has been a lot of coordination between the two countries at different levels. And Sierra Leone is in a home to some vital resources of ECOWAS itself, especially its standby force and the ability to be able to operationalize some of its own activities and the force itself. So the choice might be strategic at this particular point in time, that because you never can tell when ECOWAS will have to be able to call on the service of the standby force. So you want somebody who will be ready and who actually has some kind of control of the resources of that particular force within his own country.
You see any situation where they might need to call on the standby force?
Oh, yes, definitely. Standby force, don't forget, is set up for the purpose of counterterrorism activities. And we still have quite a bit of that in West Africa, in the Sahel region, even in Nigeria here. And I think one of the bane of regional organizations in Africa, when I use regional, I'm subsuming under that, the sub-regional ones too, like ECOWAS. Of course, then you have the continental one, like African Union itself, is the fact that we often say so much about what we want to do in terms of, oh, let's, engage counterterrorism, let's go for peace and security and this and that. But we don't often put the resources that are needed there. And we have the same problem in the African Union, which I had the opportunity of drafting the first major treaty that will govern the African Union and what we call Regional Economic Communities in Africa State, which is REX. That is the relationship between the African Union and organizations like ECOWAS in the field of peace and security. It was a huge opportunity. I had the opportunity to work on that in 2005, about 20 years ago now. And most of those things that I envisaged in that particular treaty came to play within a very short time, actually before the treaty itself was adopted by ECOWAS, by African Union, beg your pardon. But unfortunately, you often lack political will. So we spend so much time, pontificating and, trying to wipe up sentiment. But at the end of the day, we don't often, follow through. So I'm thrilled that eventually they're operationalizing standby force of ECOWAS. But the question is, how much are they going to make use of it? It's still out there.
One of the things that struck out for me in the summary done by our correspondent is the fact that ECOWAS doesn't seem to be giving up on the Sahelian states that have now left the Union, even though, yes, which is one of the areas where some people have, said that the chairmanship of President Bola Tinubu's tenure will be checkered in terms of how he handled the situation. They think that if it was done a little differently, perhaps we will not be in a state where they would leave. But this is the situation right now. In spite of all of the periods of grace extended by ECOWAS, the members still decided that they were going to leave. But it doesn't appear that ECOWAS is giving up on them just yet. They've appointed a negotiator. And I'm wondering, why is it so important for us to have those members within the bloc? If they've decided to go, just leave them be. When eventually the moment impresses upon them that it doesn't make any sense, perhaps they'll find their way back.
Margaret, that's a very brilliant question. Let me start by saying that I don't quite agree with people, as you said earlier on, who think that, they could hold the way then the chairman, Ashwaju, handled the affair when there were military coups in those countries. That if he had handled them differently, maybe the outcome would have been different. Let me unbundle it. Do I actually agree entirely with the way the ECOWAS chairman then, that's Ashwaju, handled by drawing that red line and trying to authorize a military intervention? I do not. I do not, because it's very dangerous for you internationally to draw a red line and not be able to follow through. We saw when Obama did that in Syria. When he drew the red line about the use of a chemical weapon, and it was actually used, he couldn't move at the end of the day. So it was very dangerous to draw a red line without moving through. So the president shouldn't have drawn in a very sort of too quickly, a red line.
I think that was the criticism, that it was hasty.
Precisely. I understand that. So that's how I'm unbundling it. So he quickly drew a red line. They couldn't follow through. But then we didn't say that because of that was why those countries left. The answer is no. Look, the exit of some Sahelian states from ECOWAS was a disaster waiting to happen. ECOWAS had been dogged in its entirety of its history by Anglophone and Francophone rivalry within the body itself, right from its formation. And it was deliberate. Don't forget, ECOWAS was formed by the Nigerian head of state then, calling on his counterpart, Nasingbe Eyadema in Togo. It was deliberate. So an Anglophone and a Francophone president or head of state, two of them, traversed all the West African states to be able to make them sign up to the famous Lagos Treaty, 28th of May, 1975. So it was deliberate to bring both ECOWAS, the Francophonie and the Anglophonie together. But pretty much after ECOWAS was formed, it was quickly discovered that things were not going to go as they actually anticipated it or expected it to be. So what I'm trying to say is that those countries went, number one, could not be, could not simply be penciled down to, because of the way it was handled, albeit it could have been handled differently. But number two is that it mirrors a much bigger problem, and that is coming back to your last issue about, do we really need to have these countries back? No. It goes to what I call the original sin in Africa about forming regional organizations. I'll explain it very briefly. When the European Union was going to start in 1957, a few countries came together, first of all, established values, democratic values, human rights, this and that, and only among themselves, they subscribed to that. Then once they become solid, they then began to extend the invitation to other European states. And they told them, if you wanted to be our member state, you must subscribe to these values that we already established. By subscribing to the values, you will get A, B, C, D carrots. But if you violate any of them, the sticks will be out for you. That is why till today, Turkey, one of the most economically prosperous countries in Europe, is not a member of the EU. Because EU says, you haven't complied with our human rights and this and that, so we cannot allow you in. Why is Turkey trying so hard to be in the EU? Because it knows that if it is in the EU, there will be subsidy for its farmers, Turkish students to go and study in Western Europe, wherever, and pay the same fee a Brit is paying in the UK as a home student. All those things are carrots, basically. You don't have that in Africa. I do understand when the Organization of African Union was formed in the early 60s, we needed the numbers because most African colonies, countries were under one form of imperial colony or the other. So we needed everybody that was free then to join. But then, year 2000, when African Union was going to be formed, I particularly thought that the leadership of the OAU then, that had become completely dysfunction, would take the opportunity to follow that particular path and take very democratic states to start a new organization. But we didn't do that. We just brought everybody inside again. The same thing with ECOWAS. What values? Let me ask you a question, Mark. What are Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, what are they missing by not being in ECOWAS? They're missing practically nothing. They don't have to contribute any penny to it anymore. They are no longer there. And that is why ECOWAS has to be begging people to come back to join it. You don't suspend somebody, penalize them, and then begin to beg them back. It means you have there's something missing in your system at the end of the day. That is the crux of the issue.
I do know that my colleague Ayo has questions for you. Ayo.
Well, thank you, Markwe. I do not want to believe that, Prof, I don't want to believe that you've answered my question already because I was going to ask, what the real challenge of this regional integration is. Now, it would seem then that from some of the things that you have said, the efforts have been made by various bodies to find out exactly what the real problem is, and probably even marshal some kind of regional integration. For instance, we've been talking about the AFCFTA now for eons, and it would seem like we're just pussyfooting around it. Then Nigerians can go to different parts of Africa, at least different parts of the West African sub-region, with very, very minimal, if any, inhibition at all. So in that light, if the people are now having a problem among themselves, what then would you call the real challenge to this regional integration in Africa? We're supposed to be an economic community. Are we an economic community? We seem to be more political than economic. So what, in your opinion, are the real challenge to regional integration in Africa, not only at the sub-regional level, but even at the continental level?
Well, thank you very much, Ayo. I think my earlier response to Mark's question sort of preempted part of your questions, and I think I've answered it partly with that. But there are other things that I didn't touch on. You just mentioned the fact that we seem more of a political community than an economic community. But are we really a political community at the end of the day? But that's a billion-dollar question. Let's put that on aside. But look, as I said earlier on, if you want to integrate, if you want to come together, there must be a genuine and, well thought out reason for wanting to come together. Look, I had the opportunity of working with the African Union, stationed in Addis Ababa, and as I said, I was the African Union, probably the first African Union expert on regional mechanisms. My job actually was to help African Union sort of establish its regional mechanism, which meant at that point in time, I had to go to almost there were 8 major RECs in Africa. I had to visit every single SADC in South Africa, Southern Africa, beg your pardon, EAC in East Africa, ECOWAS, and so on and so forth. I had to visit many of them, including IGAD in Djibouti and stuff like that. I had to visit many of them, trying to bring a cohesive relationship between those sub-regional organizations and the African Union, because they've been operating in silos at that point in time. And as I said earlier on, that was after I drafted the treaty that would bring both together. But the point is, one of the greatest challenges is there is a total lack of understanding of the reason for integration among African heads of state. More often than not, they see these organizations as a club, and that reflects in the language also. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we don't have our cultural ways of doing things in Africa. But when you come together as head of state who want to do serious business, and all you are hearing is, backslapping, my brother from this, my brother from that, my sister from this, my sister from that, at the end of the day, not much is actually put on the table in terms of concrete things that should be done, that need to be done in the continent. So, and again, there's proliferation. You have a member of ECOWAS who is a member of CENSAD, which used to be hosted in Libya, and so on and so forth. So there is so many, proliferation going on and so many labidization going on. So at the end of the day, what you had is a spaghetti bowl of different countries, different ideas, and because you have your fingers in so many pies, you are never able to cook one solidly.
Prof, let me ask this question.
So as I said earlier on, part of it was the reason why they were formed.
Yeah, my apologies. So now that we have this on our hands, both at the regional level and at the continental level, it would seem like every state seems to be more interested on what's happening within them. You've given the example of the European Union, and a number of people would significantly agree with you. So do they have something like that? They are among themselves in the Asian communities and even in the Americas, so to speak. What kind of body, maybe I should ask you first of all, do we need a regional body or a continental body to be together as a region or as a continent? Granted, the whole world wants to come to Africa now, seeing that Africa is the next civilization. And it would seem like Africa is the one behind in its own civilization. A good number of Africans still blame colonial masters for the woes that they are suffering. Nigeria, no less. So what should happen? Do you think we need a regional body or a continental body? If we do, what are the concrete, foundational, fundamental steps that must be taken if it must achieve any significant thing close to what's happening in the EU?
Well, thank you so much, Ayo. I think that was a question I've never had any journalist probably ask me on regional integration. And it's the most pivotal question, I must say. So the first question you asked in terms of whether we need regional or continental organizations, look, my answer straight away is yes. And that is because there is always power sometimes, and there's always strength in strength and power in collectivity. Because as the aphorism goes, no man is an island on his own. You want to be able to relate to others and to function with them so you can maximize your resources and whatever you have. I mean, even the law of comparative advantage will bear that out. So I don't think there is any doubt in the fact that, when well intended, you do need a regional organization, be it at a continental level or at a sub-regional level. Now, your next question goes off from that, which is, what kind of organization do we need? Now, that is very, very important. Because before you ask that question, you did mention something very important, which is that every single state seems to be interested in their own affairs. Now, that goes to answer your question about what kind of organization. There's a difference between a normal international organization and a supranational organization. What you have in Africa today are nothing but international organizations, whether it's ECOWAS, it is African Union, it is CENSAD, it is ECAS, it is IGAD. In other words, an international organization is a donee of powers from its individual member states and can never use power beyond what is allowed by individual member states. So take ECOWAS as an example. ECOWAS come together, they form African countries came together, West African countries came together, form an organization called ECOWAS, gave part of their power to it to govern them in certain areas. But ECOWAS can never go beyond what individual members, have agreed that it should do on their behalf. And that was why it was so easy for those 3 states to just exit. And normally, when you exit, an organization, there should be a period under ECOWAS is 1 year, within which you must still comply with everything that you've agreed to. But that can only be possible when you have a supranational organization. Now, a supranational organization like the European Union is an organization that the member states have not only donated part of their sovereignty to it, but they've allowed it to go beyond what individual member states themselves could do. And that is why it is possible for EU today to sanction soccer bugs, to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars and do so many things and punish a member state. You can do that because that is what they've agreed to. They've agreed that you are a supranational organization, and we don't have any supranational organization in Africa. Take African Union, for instance. Can African Union punish South Africa or Nigeria or Egypt or Libya? The answer is an absolute no. You cannot. That is even assuming it could punish any of the smaller countries. I'm talking about its biggest donors. You can never punish that. It's not possible because you are not a supranational organization. So for you to be able to have a meaningful international organization, you have to have some element of supranationality in which member states must be able and willing to say, look, the reason we come together is to make sure that we are collectively protected and want to do things better than we do individually. Oh. So therefore, we want you as an organization to be able to lead us beyond how we can lead ourselves individually.
Let me quickly bring this in, and this is outside of Africa. Given what is currently happening in the Middle East, what do you think the response of Nigeria and that of ECOWAS should be to the conflict?
Well, look, I think from the way I see it, Nigeria as a country, let me start with Nigeria as a country, has got to tread very carefully, obviously, because there had been there was a rumor call from Tehran to a lot of states, a lot of nations, including Nigeria, I read. I cannot confirm the authenticity of that story, but I think it made round on the internet that to show up whether it was in support of Iran or not. You know, I don't think personally that Nigeria should jump and say, oh, I'm supporting you. Look, it's not an either-or business. That there was a major issue between Israel and Iran. It's been going on for decades anyway. Only this was the first time at this particular level, an outright war in which the US put itself in between that at the end of the day. So Nigeria will have to tread very carefully. And what you do is sympathize, you condemn violence, obviously, because whether you like it or not, Israel attacked Iran first. Nothing stops you from condemning that kind of aggression. It doesn't remove anything. And
they've done that already.
They've done that already. So it doesn't remove anything from you. You have to do that. You have to be honest in doing that. Because the UN Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 4, prohibits the use of force by one state against another. Even though Israel was claiming self-defense, but self-defense is governed by Article 51 of the UN Charter. There are conditions that must be there before you can say, I am acting in self-defense. Even if you're acting preemptively, that is before you are attacked. If you want to attack as a preemptive self-defense, there are criteria in international law that must be carefully followed. This has not been done. So Nigeria must understand, and by extension, ECOWAS must understand that they must not sleepwalk into a trap in which many countries in 2003 supported the US when it was going against Saddam Hussein on what became a trumped-up charge that there was a smoking gun, or that there was a chemical weapon being developed by by Saddam Hussein. We did not find a single smoking gun in Iraq. That was after how many trillions of dollars have been blown and many countries have become polarized. So both Nigeria and ECOWAS have to tread very carefully.
Well, Prof, we certainly will bring you back again on this particular matter as we continue to watch developments locally and internationally. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. Professor Ademola Abbas is a global affairs analyst. We'll take a break at this time, and we'll be looking at more local matters in just a moment. I did tell you about the PDP meeting with INEC. We'll be looking at that in just a moment. Please stay with us.